Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to WyomingPBS.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
After 40 years in broadcasting, including 35 years as one of Wyoming's most familiar news radio voices, Bob Beck is retiring. I'm Steve Peck of Wyoming PBS. We'll meet the longtime news director at Wyoming Public Radio. This is Wyoming Chronicle.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by the Wyoming Humanities Council, helping Wyoming take a closer look at life through the humanities, thinkwy.org, and by the members of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. Thank you for your support.
I wanted to ask you if you've noticed the propensity for many people to want to talk about their recollections, their memories, their sentiments, their anecdotes, their stories about listening to the radio when they were younger people, kids or teenagers.
I was one of those people too. I listened to WIND radio most nights before I went to bed, listening to Dave Baum and listening to Larry Lujak on WLS and Steve Dahl on The Loop in Chicago. So I was a avid radio listener growing up.
It happens. When I was, I think I'm maybe 8 years old, my dad gave me a little transistor radio about that big, covered with what the comedian called genuine imitation leather. And I took it to bed at night, and my brother was home for Christmas, so I got to sleep on the couch, and I'm listening there and tuned in radio stations from the West Coast, and KOMA, Oklahoma City, was a station that we listened to because it played rock and roll, and the disc jockey was the Ayatollah of rock and roll. And the things you remember, that there's just something about radio, isn't there?
Yeah, it is, and it's very intimate. I think it's much different than television. And you're driving around, it's people say it's like I'm in their car listening to us, and I feel the same way whenever I hear my friends. I have colleagues all over the country who are regularly on NPR, and I said, "Oh, Sarah's on today," or it's good to hear from Jim. And so, as you're driving around listening to those things, I think it's the intimacy that was always very cool to me.
So you mentioned these stations you listened to and these people you listened to. Where was that?
That was in Chicago. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, a town called Wheaton, Illinois. I went to the same high school. Here are three famous people for you: Jim and John Belushi, also Bob Woodward from All the President's Men fame, and the Hubble telescope. Edwin Hubble went to my school. So it was fun to grow up in the Chicago suburbs listening to Cubs baseball on WGN radio in those days.
Who was calling those games?
Vince Lloyd and Lou Boudreau. Lou Boudreau, the famous Hall of Famer, and Vince Lloyd was a great broadcaster. And then we had Jack Brickhouse on the television side before Harry Carey.
Brickhouse was Hey Hey, right?
Yeah, that's right. You got it right. And he was very famous.
A lot of people that get started in media, especially, at least in my experience, who become management level editors, or in your case news directors, have a sports background when they begin in media, and you did as well, right?
That's actually why I went to college at Southern Illinois University to become a radio television major, is I wanted to be a sportscaster, and I did that. I got hired to be a sports broadcaster, DJ, and news person at a little station called WHPI. Their theme was Whoopee Radio, making whoopee 24 hours a day. We had to,
with Bob Beck.
Yeah, it was a country radio station, and we had to answer the phone. You're in whoopee country. My friends would call up just to hear me say that. So, but WHPI was my first radio station. I worked at a station in Benton, Illinois, shortly thereafter, and I was the sports director. And so I did play-by-play of a number of schools. I did SIU basketball, Southern Illinois.
Is that the Salukis?
That is the Salukis. I did some basketball games with one of those stations, and then I was also the sports director at WSIU Radio, our public radio station there, and which the amount of talent we had at that radio station. There was one day I had won one of my Murrows that I had won. They had posted a thing of all the people who were alums that had won Murrows, and there was like 35 names there. And that just shows you what.
Tell us quickly what the Murrow Award is.
Oh, Edward R. Murrow Award is something from it's one of our big awards. It's sort of a radio version of the Emmy, but the regional Murrows, you compete against a number of states in your region and commercial radio stations as well as public stations. And we've won a bunch in our most recent years. And so I've picked up 5 myself, and it's really something you strive to get. But yeah, it was all play-by-play, and that's how I kind of ended up in Wyoming. They were looking for somebody to do news and play-by-play at KROE in Sheridan.
You moved from job to job for a while, which is common for people beginning in the business. What made you decide this would be the thing to do?
It was funny, I had a couple of friends there. I had a couple of classmates who were there. It was funny, I was freaking out. It had been a month since I graduated. I didn't have a full-time job yet. Yeah, an entire month, and I thought, well, this is a failure. Nobody's gonna hire me. I was just chilling, and this job came up. It was a chance to do play-by-play. I was always told that being just a play-by-play announcer by my college professors was a hard gig. You're going to have to do something else. You'll either sell or do news, and doing news sounded better. So I did the job, and I was promptly assigned to the beats that nobody else wanted to do, the city council, the school board, the evening meetings, that kind of thing, where everybody else did the fun stuff, the courts that happened during the day. But I loved my time doing Sheridan College basketball. It was interesting to travel with that team on buses all over the region, and if I journal these days, but I didn't then, and I really regret it because there's a book that could come out of that. And you had African Americans facing racism, right in front of you, and it was an interesting season.
Yeah, I've always thought of what a challenge that was for those kids coming to. Even the big towns in Wyoming are small. The community colleges were very important in that way to the state, I've always thought, because they added a measure of diversity that you just didn't see.
It's an interesting point, and I think that it was also good for these kids. There was a kid from Brooklyn, there was a kid from Seattle, there was Los Angeles, to get out and see the rest of the world a little bit.
Well, that's what I was going to say. We've got you to Wyoming now.
Yeah.
So, but the career move that became the reason we're talking to you here, that you've become Wyoming institution, let's face it, that's what you are, came about how?
Well, I came to KOWB KCGY, which is a commercial station here that was owned by Kurt Gowdy, and which was cool, and I got to meet him several times.
Surely everyone in our listening audience or viewing audience knows who Kurt Gowdy is, but just in case.
Our generation,
who was he?
He was the Joe Buck of broadcasters, but even more so. Yeah. He did every World Series, he did every Final Four, he did every other Super Bowl, and so he was one of the biggest names in broadcasting at the time.
And a Wyoming guy.
But essentially from Cheyenne, went to the University of Wyoming, played sports here, and went off and almost right away became a Major League Baseball announcer. I think he started with the Yankees and then was with the Red Sox forever, and so just about as famous a guy as you could meet, and so to meet him in person, and I won an award through the Wyoming Association of Broadcasters one year, and he actually did a spot or a commercial or a promo and just congratulating me and have his voice. Did I save that? Of course not, because I'm an idiot. But that was just amazing. If Kurt Gowdy saying the congratulations to Bob from a very proud owner, and that was about as good as it got. And I had a chance to do some stuff with the Wyoming Sports Network, which they had just taken over, and then I did high school play-by-play for the Plainsmen for 4 seasons. And then it was time to leave. It was time to find something else to do, and a job fell on my lap, which was Wyoming Public Radio. My friend Frank Imhoff, who I think was the news director 6 or 7 years here, had recommended they hire me, and Lyle Metler was the general manager then. I had known him. My wife at the time was interested in getting a master's degree, and so we decided to stay for a couple of years. This is in 1988, and so I'm still here. She passed away, but it's, she stayed for 2 masters and a doctorate, so it all worked out for her. So.
And you made the transition then to full-time news. You weren't involved in sports with KWR, correct?
I haven't done a sports broadcast in probably 20 years or so it's been a while. I do features once in a while, but
sure,
and I do cover the games, the football games in particular, but it's I haven't done. I don't know if I still can. Steve will have to see, although I suspect I could dust something off.
How did you take to the transition to news? Was it feel comfortable for you?
It's not easy for me. It's never been something that was just an easy transition. I had to work a little harder at it just to get to where I wanted to be. They had some part-timers who were, I think, grad students and a couple of students, but I was the professional. And so I was the only one that was getting full-time pay to be there. I did enjoy training people. That part was a lot of fun. So in '85, I had an opportunity to go cover the legislature for a couple of things. And so I went over probably 15, 20 times that year, and actually, for some stupid reason, really enjoyed it. It was just fun, and it was the best thing going on in the state. It was the most interesting thing, and I got to know Ed Hirschler a little bit that year, and then covered the '86 campaign, which was a lot of fun because that was when Pete Simpson faced off against Mike Sullivan, but it was Pete Simpson in every Republican big shot in the state running for that
big primary that year.
Yeah, and I always think back on Bill Budd, who maybe didn't win the election, but became governor later in C.J. Bach's novel. So I always thought that was interesting. That maybe inspired me a little bit more in politics too, to do some more things. And so I was interested in maybe continuing that, and they said okay, and I've gone most every day ever since then, unless the roads scare me.
I think it's safe to say that you must be one of the 2 or 3 most expert observers of the legislature in Wyoming. There's no other way to put it. I know a lot about it, but I barely hold a tiny candle to you because you've been there, you've seen it, you've met the people, you've consistently followed the issues from one session to the next, from one administration to the next, and you become an authority, don't you?
Yeah, you do, and it's, Joanne Barron is always going to be the one at the top as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. But there were a few of us who covered it a lot of years. Jim Angel, who just recently passed away, was one of those too. And it's different though. I'll tell you what, it was harder to cover it back then because we didn't have the websites, you didn't have the background information.
If you wanted to know what's going on at a committee meeting, you had to go.
You had to go, and you couldn't Google other people's stories. I mean, you had to go to the library and maybe look at them for background, and so it was, I'm sure I made a bunch of mistakes back then, but it was a lot of fun. There were some real characters in the legislature when I first started.
Who stands out in your memory? Who are a couple of them?
Well, I liked, I really liked Dave Nicholas, actually, who ran for governor. He was actually a mentor of mine. He was a senator from here in Albany County, and later led NATO for the U.S. and was just a really smart and interesting guy. Rick Tempest was one of my favorite people. The Representative Budd from Pinedale, Dan Budd, who was about as funny a character as we've ever had, and he would go into these rants on the floor, and Clarion Law was also a really fun person to talk to, and Eli Bebout was starting back then. Hank Coe was starting. John Perry. I mean, we had some really great people. Charlie Scott was still there, as he is now. He's going to outlast me. I thought I could at least hang in there until he was done, but not. But
it's an interesting news state, more interesting than people who don't live in Wyoming might realize. There's so many competing interests related to industry and environment and land use and water and wildlife and politics all together. A great election state, typically. So there's a lot to cover in Wyoming news, considering there's so few people here.
Well, there is, and different corners of the state present some different things. You have to know how to cover a lot of different things. I've done stories on all those things, and I've always thought that it's made me a much more well-rounded individual because I understand ranching just enough to be dangerous and energy and as I would interview people to work here for us, they would come out with certain views on climate change, and I would explain to them, well, energy is the leading business, and so if some of these rules are proposed, you could be seeing some communities go away. So how would you, what do you think about that? And so that's the thing you learn about in Wyoming, is that there's always another side to it. You have to look at both sides of these energy issues. You have to look, we've been talking about diversifying the economy since I was in my 20s, and it's not happened, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. And so, that's our tax base. So if you get rid of some of this stuff, as we've already seen from time to time, our tax base slips down. So what are we going to do about that? And I see no interest in the majority party in the state on raising any taxes. And so this is this conflict that is always part of Wyoming, which has made it interesting. Wildlife issues, again, corridor matters that come up from time to time, that how do you address those properly and keep energy going? And we've shown that we can do it, and you always know there's a solution. I'm the same way. If the FCC wants us to do extra stuff, I don't want to do it. And
but you find a way.
But you find a way eventually if you want to operate. So there you go.
You entered into management eventually with Wyoming Public Radio, and I think people who haven't been in management don't fully appreciate it until they're in it, that personnel is this overriding, never-ending challenge. My observation has been that you've been able to keep a good-sized staff, and you've acquired excellence. Here's another frustrating thing for small media personnel issues, at least I experienced it. I always enjoyed the process of finding the best people I could find who would be willing to come and work in Wyoming, and enjoyed working with them for as long as they stayed. Hated them for about a week when they left because I wish they hadn't, but then looked on with great interest and almost sort of a fatherly pride to see where they ended up. And you've experienced that a dozen times, I would think, at least.
Yeah, and even started well back in the 90s. We hired a young lady out of Greeley. She was at Northern Colorado, and her name was April Zesbaugh. And she was the best host I've ever had. And she went on and worked at KOA in Denver just left, actually just retired early. Really? And won all kinds of awards, and just really was a voice of Denver for many years. And so it started there. It really turned for us in the early 2000s. So we had good people always, but we were able to get a little bit more money, and part of that was the state was doing better, and so we were able to raise our salaries. And I developed this connection with Columbia University in New York through a freelancer that we had, who highly recommended us to the professors there. And so they got a bunch of their students to apply for an opening I had. And we hired a woman named Kristen Espelin, and she had a classmate that she knew, Elsa Partan. And then Elsa went back and spoke to a class, and Peter O'Dowd, who's now on Here and Now, he came. And Columbia University is obviously one of the top journalism broadcast schools in the country, but they also have public radio program. Even on my staff right now, Will Walkie, who's our newest hire, and Camila Kadelska, both came from Columbia. So we continue to have Caroline Ballard, who was here for a long time. She's a Columbia graduate. And so we had this connection that really helped a lot getting some of the top young people in the country to Wyoming. And because we had treated them well, because they had won awards, and because all of my employees would go back and they would speak to future classes, we just had this train rolling. The other thing that we were able to do, I was smart enough to realize that NPR interns are probably pretty good. And so I started fishing where there were NPR interns, and out of that group, there was a woman named Addie Goss, who was one of my great hires. We had, both Tristan Autom was both a Columbia graduate as well as an NPR intern. So we had that connection too. So I was fishing where the fish are, if you don't mind the phrase, and we were getting a lot of great people. Then at the same time, we were getting our own people. I had this woman that wrote me a letter and ignored her for a while because I was busy, and finally brought her in, and she was somebody I think had been doing the mom business and doing other things, running a business with her husband. And she was here in Laramie and wanted to come in and volunteer. And so we finally took a flyer on her, brought her in, trained her a few things, and then she pushed me for a part-time job and got it. Her name is Melody Edwards, and Melody's been with me forever, and is certainly one of the better-known voices in the state, and an incredible voice. She did not always sound like that, nor did I, but she's worked extremely hard and had gotten into the podcast world and has won a boatload of awards over the things she did. So we've created some of our own people. Sure. Maggie Mullen, who is now with Wildfile, but she started with us as an intern, and we've always had good luck with that, creating some people from within. But in the early days, we just didn't have jobs for them. But lately, we've been able to train some people, grow our own, and Caitlin Tan, who works for me now, was one of my colleagues' interns, and she always wanted to come back. And she had been at West Virginia Public Radio, and now she's back working for us. And she's from Pinedale and wanted to live there, and so it's great that we have somebody in the western part of the state that can do really good work. So
well, you've had to get creative, I know, in finding ways to pay these people. That's part of
fundraising.
Another thing you've become an expert in.
Yes, you raise money, and that goes hand in hand with excellence. We've won some awards. Our show Open Spaces is highly regarded across the country, and luckily in the state as well.
Open Spaces was a big initiative for you, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you were at a stage in your career when you had a lot to do. You proved mastery in most of it. Could have stayed plenty busy without doing that, but decided to take this on. Tell us what it is quickly, and what was the process that led you to do it?
It's a news magazine program. I always wanted to do that show. I did a daily talk show, which we all do in Wyoming, right? That was what everybody did, and it wasn't very good. I think twice a year we had the STD person come on the show talking about chlamydia at lunchtime. It was wonderful. So I wanted to do something a little more in depth. It had good sound and that kind of thing, and so we created Open Spaces and then played with it for about a year. But that very first year we entered in national competition and won first place. And so we said, well, this is good. And it forces us to do long-form stories, right, not just do interviews. Interviews are a big part of it, but doing in-depth stories about things that really matter in Wyoming. I can't remember actually when we started, 2005 maybe, and it's just really worked out for us. And it's it's won, I think, 11 awards itself, either first or second nationally against other public radio stations. The idea is to have a very highly produced show about Wyoming.
You've logged decades in broadcasting and radio and at your particular station. Now you're leaving that. You're leaving the state to 2 time zones away. It's a big life change. How are you feeling about all that?
Well, 5 years ago, I had a life change already. My wife died of cancer, and you're numb for about a year in that regard. From that time on, I was always kind of like, well, am I going to stay here? Am I going to be by myself? What's going to happen? And it's funny, we all went through the pandemic, and at the end of 2020, I was just sort of sick of it and got one of those dating apps and met a woman in Laramie who was recently divorced within the previous 2 years. And we braved it and went out and just really hit it off. And she had an opportunity to become a director of admissions in New York, and she asked me if I'd be willing to go. And so we ended up getting engaged, got married this summer, and she's there now, and she thought it might be nice if her husband lived in the same state with her, and I thought so too. And I realized life was short. And I just didn't want to, there's been a lot of late nights with the legislature, a lot of stressful days, sure, and as we all have gone through in the media. And I was going to probably try and figure something else out. And this just forced that a little bit and sped it up. And so, yes, I'm going to be moving to central New York, just about 20 miles east of Syracuse. And, the future is a beautiful mystery.
Not that there's anything wrong with playing golf or sitting in a fishing boat. You don't see yourself in retirement as one of those guys.
I see myself probably spending a couple hours working out a day and then riding my bike and doing all those things initially, and then we'll just kind of see what happens. It's possible that's all I'll do. Yeah. I might write a book, Steve, you never know.
I know, I'm sure. I speak for many in Wyoming who dislike the idea of not turning on the radio in the morning and hearing you there. And this is the magic of radio that we've talked about. I congratulate you on a fine career.
Thank you.
And thank you with really great appreciation and value for the way you kept showing up, the way you performed with excellence, and did a service to the state of Wyoming which we might not have necessarily felt we were entitled to, but we're very fortunate to have had. Thanks for your time, and hope to bump into you now and again.
Well, I'll be back once in a while, that's for sure.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by the Wyoming Humanities Council, helping Wyoming take a closer look at life through the humanities, thinkwhy.org, and by the members of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. Thank you for your support.